Hi, I'm historical romance author Elizabeth Ellen Carter. It's my great pleasure to have with me Emily Murdoch. She's also a historical romance author, and we're both in a fabulous new anthology coming out in October called Upon a Midnight Dreary. And if the line sounds familiar, of course, it's from Edgar Allan Poe's classic The Raven, and you'll be unsurprised to learn that there are lots of delicious ghost stories in there, and of course, absolutely delightful romance. Uh, Emily, can you tell me a bit about the project? What was the brief that Kathryn gave us?
It was quite broad, which I really liked. I'm a writer that really struggles if I'm given a really narrow guideline or brief. I like to let my imagination kind of wander. So it was essentially a ghost story with romance, and that was all I was kind of given. And that was perfect for me because, as you can probably tell from my delightful accent, I am English. I actually live just a few miles outside of Bath, so very much Jane Austen town around here. So there's quite a long history in England of ghost stories and of mystery and confusion and not being quite sure what's real and what's not. And of course, that gets the heart racing just as much as a really good romance. So I was almost spoilt for choice. I found it really, really difficult. There are so many opportunities to find ghost stories pretty much anywhere you go. England has a lot of scary stories, a lot of folk stories. And a lot of them are location based, and I've lived all over the UK. I grew up in Kent, which is just south of London, and it's a county or a state that's surrounded by water on three sides. It kind of juts out of the country. So shipwreck stories were pretty much what I was raised on when it comes to ghost stories. I grew up near Sandwich, which is a town where the Earl of Sandwich invented the sandwich, so that's where that comes from. And you've got places like Gallows Field, which is not just executions, which was the form of justice at the time, but you had witch burnings, you had drowning in the river of criminals. The city I actually grew up in, Canterbury, which is of Chaucer fame, still has a ducking stool by the river. And that's very much the kind of the world I grew up in.
Well, the question I've got to ask is, does that ducking stool get used at all? I mean, I can imagine on a really hot day, it's sort of, okay, send me out.
I think what's quite frightening about this, and I used to walk from one side of Canterbury High Street to the other to get to school. It's a very small, we call them cities in England because they have cathedrals, not because they're particularly big. Only about 20,000 people live there. So it's small. It's a small town to village compared to most places around the world. There is still kind of, you can see where someone's gripped the arms of the chair. This is about 450 years old. So this is right peak 1500s, 1600s witch burning, ducking of women who were too mouthy, which I definitely would have been in that line. And it brings history alive in a way that I don't think you can get from a book. So that's always a challenge for me as a historical writer, whether it's pure historical or historical romance. How can I show and give that feeling, that sensation, that kind of hair standing up on your arms sensation that I get sometimes when I'm just walking around these historical locations? So what I essentially tried to do was I just started reading about different ghost stories that I didn't know. I thought if it was one I already knew, then I would already have this preconception about who was involved. I'd find it quite difficult to bring into a romance story because usually they're quite creepy. And I discovered a place called Ettington Park. Now, this is a big country house in Warwickshire, in England, which is just down the road from Shakespeare. So it's proper literary country. And although the house that's there right now is this big Victorian kind of Gothic, actually that house is only, it's young, it's modern in England, it's only 250 years old. There's been a house there for about 1,000 years.
Wow.
And the same family has lived there for over, they are mentioned the Doomsday Book, that's 1066 to 80. The Shirley family has been there for a really long time. And I thought, okay, well, this place has got to have some good ghost stories. And you know what? It's still owned by the family. It's now a hotel. And, I'd love to go there one day and stay overnight because it's considered to be one of the most haunted places in Britain. And I was like, okay, there's a lot of haunted places here. the more I read, I was astonished. You remember, people have lived there for over 1,000 years. There are stories of books flying off the shelves, and there was a maid who accidentally died by falling down the stairs after an argument with her squire. There's a Victorian elderly lady who patrols the long gallery. And the more I read, it was fascinating, but nothing was really jumping out at me. And then I discovered Lady Emma. Lady Emma is a nickname given to a ghost who is a governess, and she protects the children of the family. And I just thought, okay, my current series with Dragonblade is the Governess Bureau, and it follows a woman called Miss Vivian Clark who founds this organization, and she lets out and organizes governesses to go to the nobility and royalty of England and Ireland. And of course, there's always a love story. And I thought, aha, a governess. Okay, what would a ghost governess be doing to protect children in this story? And that's how it kind of all started. And so my story, A Governess of No Fear, essentially tells the beginning of how the Governess Bureau is founded.
I love it. I love it. Is your ghost sort of one of the key characters? Is it, well, it can't be a tragic romance, otherwise it wouldn't be a romance, but how do you weave the ghost story into a romance?
The story of Lady Emma is that she was a governess for the Shirley family, and there was I won't give too much away, but there was a tragic accident involving the children she was caring for. And ever since then, she's made it her mission to protect the children of the next generation and the next generation, the next generation. And one of my characters in my Governess Bureau series, Miss Vivian Clark, who's founded the Bureau, there's hints so far, we're into book 3 of the series, there's hints so far that something happened when she founded the Bureau, and that made her so against love and so against romance and so against matrimony that she's made a rule that says, right, you're not allowed to fall in love. That if you join us, that's it. You are unable to marry. And I've started to lay hints that there was a co-founder of the Governess Bureau with her. And I thought, well, what would happen if the Shirley family were one of the first ever clients of the Governess Bureau? What happens when you put an alive governess who's doing her best into a house where there's a ghost governess who is absolutely not having any of it? And I thought, it's a novella, it's not a full-length novel, so I'm not able to go into the full depth of Lady Emma's story, but there's a little bit of comedy, there's a little bit of romance, and there's a little bit of shiver up the spine.
I love it. I can't wait to read it. Again, it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, that Kathryn gave us a really broad brief with this, and whenever you gather writers in one situation and say, here's the setup, go away and work your magic, the magic happens, and the diversity of stories that I'm looking forward to in this anthology is going to be really exciting.
I think what's so intriguing for me is that, of course, we all wrote these stories during a pandemic. I don't want to talk too much about it because I quite like escaping it, but research became really challenging during a pandemic. I wasn't able to go, which is what I really wanted to do. I thought, it's a hotel, this is perfect. I don't even need to ask permission to turn up on their doorstep. I can just go there. And of course, I wasn't able to do that. But actually, it's kind of forced me to learn to research in a different way. I am very fortunate that I live here in England. I can hop on a train or get in the car and go to it. England's not that big. I promise you, it's not that big. And it kind of gave me a new appreciation for all of the American and Australian authors and authors from other parts of the world who can't just pop over to Stratford-on-Avon and see a Shakespeare play, or just pop over to London and go into an archive. And I've kind of realised how privileged I've been. And actually, this is a new way of writing. And actually, it's been quite an interesting challenge because it's not a full-length novel. I haven't had to really grapple with huge historical insight. But I have been able to find rough floor plans and family trees. And that's enabled me to, I've got to make sure I set it at a time where there were children at the right age, small things like that. And it's really, I don't think it'll prevent me from ever, when I'm allowed to, going out and visiting historical sites and digging around into archives. but it's certainly given me a new respect and a new understanding of how actually a lot of authors research in a very different way to me. And I think that's what I love about this anthology, is that there are a lot of authors contributing, and we all are different ages, from different countries, with different backgrounds, with different passions, with different interests. And yet it's all going to come together with this core theme. And I've just loved that.
Absolutely brilliant stuff. You've mentioned the chills that you've had sort of going down sort of certain streets. Have you actually seen a ghost?
I don't think I've seen a ghost. So I'll tell two stories. Number one, I grew up in Kent, which is this, you know, surrounded by the sea. So there's a lot of military history. You know, whenever we're invaded, that's where we're invaded. And in England, we're invaded a lot. And there's a castle called Dover Castle, which has been there about 600 years. It's one of Henry VIII's favourite places. It was really crucial in World War II. There's underground tunnels that go for hundreds of miles underneath. And there's a tour that they do that's specifically underground, under all these tunnels. And, you know, you spend the day in the sunshine on the battlements and looking out at the sea and going, oh, this is lovely. What a lovely day out. And then you have lunch and you go down, and it's down, down, down. And you feel like you're being slowly buried alive, because there's nothing mechanical down there, really. It's all very basic. And so you are walking yourself into the ground. And it's freezing cold. Yeah, it doesn't matter what it's like outside. It could be baking hot August, doesn't matter. Or January in Australia, unsure.
Yeah.
And the chill that you feel, it feels supernatural. It feels like it's not possible for this to be entirely natural. And of course, the tour guides are brilliant. The tour guides are just fantastic. And you're encouraged to stay in your kind of tour bubble. But at the same time, when you stop at a certain point and they give a little talk and say, right, you know, you can explore these few rooms, you know, in 5 minutes we'll move on. And you're walking past, and it's recent history, really. You know, this is 1940s. It's not, you know, my wheelhouse is medieval to Regencies. This is not hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It's, you know, within living lifetime memory for a lot of people. And you just have this sense that at any moment, I'm going to turn a corner and I'm going to see someone in military uniform rushing with a telegram in their hand, desperate to update a map. You just have this sense that they've just popped out for a tea break and you are intruding on their space.
You've just given me goosebumps.
And that's the thing. Yeah. I didn't see anything. I didn't see anyone, but you just have this sense that you don't belong there. And actually this is someone else's realm and you are just visiting. So that's the first. The second thing is a little bit different, and this is again just part of my personal history. So there's a little village in Kent where there's a village, and I won't say the name because there's a church there that's almost 1,000 years old. It was built by the Normans, and it's one of my favorite places in the entire world. And there's some family history there. You know, my great grandparents and grandparents are buried there. My parents got married at that church. I got married at that church. One day I'll probably be buried at that. Yeah, it's got a real spiritual connection for me because of the weight of personal history. You go into this place, it's almost entirely unspoiled. And what I mean by that is, for those who don't know, in England there have been religious wars, and during those a lot of churches were desecrated or destroyed, or their stained glass windows were destroyed, or a lot of the gilding, a lot of the painting, because we've got to remember English churches before the 1500s were beautifully painted on the walls with vibrant colours. You know, people were expected to learn the Bible stories from the murals on the walls, and we've lost that because they were whitewashed during those religious wars. So what I love about this church is that it's in such a backwater, in the middle of the English countryside, where no one really important ever came from there. Nothing important ever happened there. People just lived their lives, and they loved that church and they protected it. So when all these wars started happening, they covered up the wall paintings without destroying them.
Yeah.
And they took all the stained glass down and they hid it under the floorboards with straw. and they replaced it with just white glass, and that's how it was left for 300 years. And the secret was passed down in this village that, you know, when it's safe, when we think that this is never going to be destroyed again, this is where it is. And eventually in the Victorian era, they were like, right, reason, logic, industry has come to England. We don't think there's going to be these religious wars anymore. It's now safe. So this tiny, unimportant little village church has some of the oldest completely existent stained glass from the 1300s.
Wow.
It's almost 700 years old. It's got 12th century red and white daubed wall paintings of saints and kings of England, which you don't have in cities because they were part of this war.
Oh, and on top of that, we just fell out of that. I remember reading a couple of years ago that Notre Dame Cathedral, which we sort of in our minds is sort of the grey stone and the stained glass windows, that was as brightly coloured as everything. And I would love to see photos of that gorgeous little church you described.
And this Beautiful. Is the thing, you know, you stand there and you look around, and it's a tiny little village church, but people have stood there and prayed for safety and desperate sanctuary. They've prayed for their loved ones. They've begged for health over sickness for 1,000 years. And I feel like those words and those pleas and that desperation has poured into every single stone of that church. And when you stand there, there is a stillness that I don't think you get from a church or any religious place that's 20 years old, because you don't have the history. You don't have, you know, one of my other favourite places, which is in a completely different part of England, is a tiny chapel on a cliff. It's about 4 meters by 4 meters. It's tiny. And it was a refuge during plague. And all over the walls are these little inscriptions: 1060, protect my family; 1060, Smith; 1060, with a little church drawn over it, which was a plea for protection for those who couldn't even write.
Yeah.
And they're all over the walls. And you just have this sense that some places become
sacred
more. They become sacred for whatever religion, for whatever faith system or none. They just, I don't know if you can see.
I can.
Just talking about it. And this is what I love about where I live. I'm very fortunate to live in England, Britain, where there are these places and there are places like that all over the world. I'm not under any, misunderstanding of that, but I can go to these places and you can stand or sit there in silence and just feel the weight of history. And I love that.
Emily, thank you very much for sharing all of that. You've got an absolute gift. Upon a Midnight Dreary will be coming out in October. It is just 99 cents for an incredible anthology for a brilliant set of authors. You need to grab it. You need to grab it now. And again, Emily, thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute delight to chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you.